About Kevin and watching his beautiful path with his family is that Kevin is walking the walk. When we all talk about living in our authentic purpose and not being afraid and not living by fear, just saying yes and doing things out of the box and then having experiences and finding your way from that. It's been so fun to watch somebody actually do that live in front of you. It's so inspirational. I know you're going to love Kevin's message, and I'm super psyched you're here, Kevin. So, Kevin Hoover. Yeah.
When I was 12, I got lost in the mountains of North Carolina. And when I say lost, I don't mean like we kind of knew where we were. I mean there were helicopters involved. We were that lost. And so I was with about 5 or 6 friends of mine at the time. We were at a church retreat in the mountains of North Carolina. And what is a 12-year-old boy to do to impress some girls who were on a church trip? We run away from them. So we started running down the mountain thinking these girls would be like, look how fast they are. They must be the alpha of the group. Ladies, you know that reveals a lot about the male brain. So we ran, and there were these markers on the trail. They were yellow, and they were little rectangles on trees, and we're supposed to be following them. And so the guys I was with, we run, and we realized we're not seeing any markers. So we stop. We kind of enter this very Lord of the Rings situation, where we're now determining who the leader is. What are we going to do? What's our decision? We can go down the trail we're going, or we can turn around and go back the way we came. We'd been on the trail about 2 hours at this point, right? I think we left camp at around 10 in the morning. So it was getting to where, okay, we need to make some decisions. The fall in North Carolina, the sun goes down around 5 or 6. Daylight was against us. We decided, our 12-year-old brain, I don't know if it was the right decision or the wrong decision, our 12-year-old brain said, well, this trail has to lead somewhere. It can't lead nowhere. It's got to lead somewhere. Let's follow this trail. Wherever it ends up, we'll say, hey, we're clearly kids. We clearly don't belong here. Can you help us? And someone will help us. That's what we believed. So we're walking, and now it's getting to the point where we haven't eaten. We're in shorts, khaki shorts, mind you. We're not equipped for an expedition. We're in tennis shoes, and the sun's getting lower in the sky. So in the trees, it's getting colder. So it starts to get really serious. It was about that time we were really huddling around, drinking water from the stream. What are we going to do? We don't know. This is what we read about, and we're living it. So we walked for a little while longer. We decided to stay the course. We're too far gone. If we turn around, it's going to be dark, but by the time we get back to where we realize we were lost. So we keep walking, and finally we run into what I know now to be 2 moonshiners. At the time, they were just really scary guys with guns. They were in the middle of the forest walking towards us. And clearly, these guys, I assume they were moonshiners. They were really eager to help us move the other direction. So these men walk towards full beard. If you close your eyes and think, what does a moonshiner look like from Appalachia? That's exactly what they look like. They had shotguns, and we ran up to them eagerly. Can you help us? Told them where we were going, and they said, well, you got to turn around. This trail goes dead into the wilderness. You could walk this trail for a week and not find anything. Whew. We're 12 years old. So they turn us around, tell us where to go. We book it down the trail like it was our job, and it was. And we get back to camp, and we run through the field of camp like we're in The Sound of Music. The hills are alive. And that was the first time I ate canned green beans, and we're like, these are delicious. These are really good. My point is, sometimes we can be on the right trail, walking the wrong way. And we've got to be very discerning about who we listen to in this business. And sometimes they'll look like moonshiners, and they'll be the saving grace. I'll explain my hair later. There's another time more recently where I found myself on the right trail, going the right way, ill-prepared. Ill-prepared. My family calls it Joshua Tree. If you've never been to Joshua Tree, let me tell you about it. We were driving from Arizona into Joshua Tree, California, and I'm in charge of the driving and the planning of our trip. I'll tell you about that later too, but my odometer said 520 miles to E. I was like, we're good. We're good. We got like 280 miles to go. We're good. Now I drive a 22-foot dually truck and I pull a 42-foot camper. So there's a little more to consider than that, but I didn't consider it. I said, we're good. GPS says we're going to make it. We're going to make it, no problem. So we get off the highway with about 140 miles left to go, and the highway that we got onto was 2 lanes in the middle of the desert, soft shoulders, so we were pulling off the side of the road in sand, and we didn't see a gas station for over 100 miles. So the back seat, which is my wife and my son, the front seat is me and the dog. And so I start looking at the odometer, the miles to go, and the gas gauge, and I'm going, oh no. This is not an emergency yet, but I can see where this is headed. So I told my wife, I said, hey, if the miles to empty and the miles to go get equal, we're going to run out of gas. For sure, going to run out of gas. So get ready. And I was expecting her to be like, what did you do? And she was laughing the whole way. She's like, smile for TikTok. And I was like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I'm stressed. And Bax is having the time. He was like, look at the beautiful desert. And I'm like, we're going to be out here for a while. I hope you like it, So we're trucking along, and finally the miles to E and the miles to go are the same. I don't know how many miles it was. I was a stress mess, hot mess express coming into Joshua Tree. And I was like, oh, we're gonna run out of gas. We're on the right road. I'm going the right direction. Everything's right, except I didn't know the last 120 miles were uphill on a 2-lane road with no turnoffs and no gas stations. Didn't factor that in. Yeah, so the miles to E and the miles to go get the same, and I'm like, oh no, here we go. It's time. Got AAA, but I don't know if they'll find us, right? So we had 20 miles to go and 0 miles to empty. So on our GPS, it said, you have 20 more miles. Our gas was out. Somehow we make it into Joshua Tree, and we pull up to the first gas station. I'm like, oh, I don't know who you are, but thank you. And they don't have diesel. Take my thank you back. But I see a gas station about a mile up the road. What I'm guesstimating, probably a mile up the road. I'm like, let's go there. So I pull up there, and there's a car in the only lane that I can pull this giant rig into. And I'm like, okay. We got this. We're all right. And that's how far I was from the pump when I actually ran out of gas. And I bought the smallest gas tank they had in the gas station. Here's why. I pull up to the pump like that, and the guy in front of me is inside paying, and he comes out with a bag of ice, and he's beating it on the ground, and he's waving, and I'm like, come on, dude, come on! And he fills his cooler up, and he closes his back, and my truck turns off. So that's a situation where we were on the right path, we were going the right direction, but we were not prepared for what was ahead of us. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you about today. I really want to talk to you about leadership in this business and how you can be on the right path and ill-prepared based on markets, based on team, based on recruiting, based on companies. I want to talk to you about our adventures and what I've learned from a 4-year-old. That sounds weird, but it'll make sense. You probably already have put 2 and 2 together. The greatest inspiration of my life is my son. So what do we got to look at? We got to look at some things. I'm going to say some dirty words today. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to say some words you're going to go, oh my gosh, I wish that guy had not have said that, right? I want to get your attention today. What my intent is for you to leave here with a little different mindset than you showed up. Because I do believe a lot of us are walking a path and we're ill-prepared for what the future holds. Now, it's not often that I speak for an intellectual group, so I'm really honored to be here. Normally I speak with people I have to explain a lot to, and they don't get the jokes and all that, but I'm confident in this crowd. I'm pretty confident that we're not going to do. Yes, and I am an eXp agent, so I share that sense of humor with you guys. So we're going to talk about 4 things. The path to life, and the path to life has a lot of components to it. What we're going to talk about first is the crash. We're going to talk about surviving. I'm going to talk about rebuilding and building, and then we're going to talk about legacy. Those are things I really want you to take away from here, and we're going to use my son's story and our travels over the last 13 months to prove that you can be on the path and working the wrong angle. I need a volunteer. One I don't know, because I do know a few people in this room. Who would like to role play with me? I'll pick somebody. I saw a hand in the back. What's your name? Sorry? Lauren. Lauren, my name's Kevin. It's good to meet you. You're up for role playing. I assume you're in real estate. That's how you got in the room. That's how you got the pretzels, right? So we're going to role play a little bit. And we're going to pretend that Laura and I just met, but we've met before. So I kind of know her. I kind of know her work, know what she does. And we just met. Let's say we're at, I don't know, a barbecue. Right? And I say, hey, Lauren, good to see you again. Hey, listen, are you ready for the crash? Man, that's coming pretty soon. Lauren, what do you say?
It's not happening.
Why not?
Because values are going up just at a slower rate.
Awesome. Would anybody else answer similar to what Lauren answered? Hey, the crash coming soon. It's not happening. She goes, it's not happening. Anyone else would answer that way? Great. Now let's change the script a little bit. Lauren, you and I just get on an airplane. And I say, hey, Lauren, you ready for the crash? It's coming real soon. What do you say? Get me off this plane. Right? Context. Context is the point. We have to look at the context of our business. We have to look at the context of our lives. In this situation, Lauren answered perfectly to the first situation, but she really had to think, oh, well, if we're on a plane, crash means something totally different now. My context is different. So I can't pull out the canned answer for what people say in real estate. When they say crash, crash, hey, you're stupid, not coming, but if we're on a plane, there's a different context to it. I've got to consider that in my marketing. I've got to consider that in my social. I've got to consider that when I'm meeting a buyer or a seller. What is the context of this conversation? The language I'm using might mean something different to them. The scenarios I'm thinking about that I think of every day that are just like, duh, they might not know. So I got to be careful. I have to really hone my message in. So let me explain to you what I think when I hear the word crash. I think we all have crashes every day. We have little micro crashes, right? It doesn't have to be this serious thing. It doesn't have to be the airplane example. It doesn't have to be the real estate market. I have a bad day at work. I crash right before I come home to dinner. I have a stressful day at work. I stub my toe. I lost the game. I run out of gas. We all have these little crashes every single day. Now, here's what I know. If you're a Brene Brown fan, you'll agree with this. If we don't get vulnerable about the crash and start talking real talk with people, we're setting ourselves up for failure in a big way. Because vulnerability will find you unless you find it first. Vulnerability will find you unless you find it first, just like the truth. The truth will find you. I talk to agents all the time. And one of the things I hear when I say crash, they go, oh, none of that doom and gloom stuff. I'm like, you've got to talk about it. It can be whatever you call it. If the market's changing, the market's changing, just facts. It doesn't have to be a crash. We can have a micro crash. It doesn't have to be 2008. Who was in business in 2008? That was terrible, wasn't it? Yeah, I was in business in 2008. I was out of business in 2008 as well. Right? So we have to look at these crashes. We have to get really truthful about talking about them. Someone might be upside down on their house. We have to talk about their crash. We can't be like, oh, it'll be fine. Yeah, we'll try it. We'll see what goes. We've got to talk truth. So those are the things that we can really use when we talk about crash. So let me tell you a story about Forklift Fred, one of my crashes in my life. Forklift Fred, it's coincidence that's IPA that is on the forklift. You'd be surprised how few forklift pictures there are on the interwebs. So let me tell you a story about Forklift Fred. When I was 20 years old, I failed out of college. I know, surprise, right? The guy wearing Birkenstocks failed out of college? No. Didn't see that coming. I failed out of college. I had a summer job at a sailing camp on the coast of North Carolina. So this was back in the 90s. So if you remember the 90s, I can see some of you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. This is going to be real fun for you because I'm going to really age myself. But I didn't find out I got kicked out until I was already at my summer job because it came in a letter. So I got a letter at my summer job and saying, well, this is a whole new wrinkle in the equation. Now I have to quit a job to go back to school, to stay in school that I didn't want to be in anyway. So the letter said something like, you can come back to summer school or you can go somewhere else for your education. I said, well, the sun's out. It's the coast of North Carolina. It's summertime. I'm 20. What do you think I chose? See, I told you, intelligent crowd. Intelligent crowd. I stayed the job. I said, well, so long. Now, the school I went to is getting a lot of press right now for football, Appalachian State University, but football fans. So that's where I was. So I was like, well, see you, mountains. I'm at the coast. It's going to be fun. So summer camp ended, and so I had to go back, and my dad looked at me, and he goes, you can stay here, but you better get a job. And I was like, I don't think he's kidding. I think he's serious. So my mom worked in a factory for The Body Shop, which is a soap and organic cosmetics company from the UK. She said, I can get you a job driving a forklift. I said, whatever. Sounds great. Never done that? Sounds good. So she did. So I became a forklift driver, and I would drive through the factory and put orders in boxes for the stores. Well, I met a guy named Fred. Fred was like the alpha, the best guy on a forklift. And every day, or not every day, most days we would eat lunch out on the little pallets. I would bring my lunch, or we'd go in the cafeteria. And one day, after about 6 months of me driving this forklift, Fred said, Kev, what are you doing here? So what do you mean? I'm making a living. I'm just, making a living, doing what I do. And he said, what are you doing here? He said, how much do you make an hour? I said, $9 an hour. $9 an hour, trust me, at the time was like, we can do some damage on Friday with $9 an hour, right? And he said, well, I don't remember the age he said, but I was 20, he was in his 50s. And he said, I make $10 an hour. That's the best I'm going to do. That's why I'm so good. This is it for me. There is no other chance. There is nowhere for me to go. So we talked about that for a little bit. Mostly he talked, and I just was like, yeah, whatever, as an elder would say when you're 20 and you think you've got it all figured out. Then he said the thing that was my crash. He said, if you're here in 2 weeks, I'm going to get you fired. I believed him. And he was Fred, so he could have. One phone call, he would have had me off the forklift like that. So I thought about it long and hard, and I look back now, I'm 48 now, I look back and I go, what a moment. What a moment for someone to step up. What a moment. So I put in my notice and I quit. I went back to community college for 1 quarter, got a 3.5, applied to North Carolina State University. They said no. I said, I need a meeting with you. They said, we'll take a meeting with you. I convinced them to let me go for summer, full-time both semesters, and if I got a 3.0 or higher, they would let me in school. This was the 90s. You could do stuff like that, right? So Forklift Fred said, I'll get you fired. Changed my trajectory. I got back into what at the time was a better school than I got kicked out of. I worked 40 hours a week at an oyster bar shucking oysters, not serving tables, shucking oysters. I would shuck 7 or 8 bushels of oysters a day and go to school full time. Got my 3.0, got into North Carolina State, and that's where I graduated from. It was that little conversation, that little crash that I needed that righted the course. Who on your team needs that conversation? Who in your market needs that conversation? Who in your family needs that conversation? Someone with the courage to say, what are you doing here? Right? So we have to consider moments like that. When we talk about leadership, we talk about recruiting, what are people attracted to? You think if I met Fred today, I wouldn't try to write him a check or hug his neck, or you think I wouldn't do any, you're my friend for the rest of my life, or until whatever, right? I'm here telling this story 28 years later. He doesn't know the impact he left on me. So we have to consider these moments in our lives where we're either taking the opportunity or we're not. And Forklift Fred was an important crash for me, and I'll tell you why later. There's a lot I'm going to tell you later. So let's talk about survive. So part 1 is the crash, and it's not as severe as you might think. It can be something small. So I want you to look at your life right now and just picture, say, where are my little crashes happening? What am I doing about them? The part right after a crash is survive. Survive. Am I the only one who remembers the 1983 NCAA Basketball Men's Championship Series? I can't be. All right. 2 of us. So this will be for us. Who knows Jim Valvano? He was the coach of North Carolina State at that time. This team wasn't even supposed to be in the tournament. But if you won the conference tournament, you could go to the big dance. Guess what? They won. His motto was, survive and advance. They had so many buzzer beaters during the NCAA tournament that year, so many, they started calling the team the Cardiac Pack. Wolfpack is the mascot. They started calling, because all the fans wanted to have a heart attack every time they played. It was all buzzer beaters, right? But Jim Valvano had faith. He believed. He said, survive and advance. That's our motto. And that's what this is. It very much is vibing in on that tune of survive and advance. If you get through this, what else can you do? Right? You lose the listing appointment. Big picture, what does that mean? I don't know. It probably opens you up for the client you're supposed to have. So I want to tell you about the 2 variations of survive. One is this. This is my house. This is where we've lived for the last 13 months. my family sold our house and moved into an RV. And we had no RV experience. I've been in one RV my whole life, and I thought it was bad. I didn't like it. I was like, no. I'll just reveal my character. I'm an all-inclusive resort kind of guy. I'm a bring me something cool and refreshing kind of guy. I'm not a let's drag our house to a new dust pile and figure out how to hook up the hoses and stuff. But this was important to us. So we bought the biggest camper we could find, apparently. And my wife and I decided we were going to live locally after we sold our house to learn how to drive this thing. We'd never been in an RV. I'd never pulled an RV, certainly never backed an RV into a campground. So this was our first stop. This is outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. It looks nice, doesn't it? Like you would stay here? If you could have heard the words coming off this campsite an hour before. Lots of four-letter words. Lots of four-letter words. So my wife and I decided for 6 weeks we were going to stay local, but we were going to move campsites as much as possible. We had one caveat. We're not going to find any of those fancy pull-through sites. We're going to only back the camper in. I don't know if that was good or bad, but so we changed sites like 6 times, and there was one time we were in Myrtle Beach at Carolina Pines, and we're backing the camper in, and I'm in the front, and we would get each other on the phone, and she's behind the camper going, move to the left, move to the right. And I'm like, which left, which right? She's like, a smidge this way. That's her word, smidge. And so I'm looking in the rearview mirrors. I'm like, I don't know what that way means. So we're got the phones on, and so this particular time, I'm driving the truck like I'm racing my son in Mario Kart. It's like, and I'm like, it's not doing what I want it to. And I look out the window, and there must have been, 6 or 8 employees of the campground had now converged on our campsite. They've, in my mind, they've got cones. They probably didn't. All the neighbors are out going, kids, inside, kids. Move the trucks. And I look in my rearview mirror. When I finally get around far enough, I look in my rearview mirror. My wife is sitting on the picnic table on one end of the picnic table with her head in her hands, and her phone is on the other end of the picnic table. And I'm supposed to be talking to her, and I'm like, we got to survive this. We got to survive. So that was a version of survive where if we learned how to back this thing in, the rest of the trip was probably going to be okay. We're now 15,000 miles into it. We've driven coast to coast. So we did learn, but that's an element of survive. So it doesn't mean this grave situation that you might think. It might mean in this short period of my business, of my life, or my time, survive. What do I do to survive this week, this day, this hour, this hard conversation I'm going to have, right? How do I survive that? How do I show up with integrity? So that's one type of survival. So I want to be very clear. It doesn't have to be this grand gesture, this grand event that happens in life. It can be micro-survive. We survived backing a camper in 6 times. We've driven it across country now, helping a lot of people and having a ton of fun. And now we get to Lake Tahoe in May. The campsite's tight. My wife gets out and she's like, yeah, we got this, babe. Come on, back it on up. And the people come out because it's we're coming in between trees and stuff like that. And then one person came out later and said, hey, we saw you backing up and you backed up like 12 feet. And we're like, he's got this. And I was like, thank you. We survived, right? So that's one type of survival we want to have. It's that brief period after the crash where you go, I just need to get through this period of time and everything will be okay. There's also another type of survive. And it's a little more serious because things happen to us all in life, things we don't choose. Some of it's tough. Some of it's tough to talk about. But that's where the healing is, when we learn to talk about it. That's where the lessons are. When things get the most difficult, that's where the lessons are. When I came to, I was face down on the floor in my kitchen. I could feel the cold hardwood on my cheek. And I don't know how long I was out. I don't know what happened. I don't know what I did last before I hit the floor. But when I came to, I was shaking the dust off. And I just remember having this tingling sensation all over my body. I'd never done that before, so I don't know how you're supposed to feel when that happens. I just knew I was shocked that it happened. The reason I was on the floor is because I just put my wife and my son in a helicopter. But they weren't tourists. This was a life flight. My son was in total kidney failure, and they found a tumor the size of a softball in his abdomen. And there wasn't room. We actually had to talk them into letting my wife go. And I was in charge of going home and packing our things for an undisclosed amount of time at a hospital. And when I got home, I put my hand on a little ladder that my son used to use to watch me cook. And that's the last thing I remember. It was the first time I'd had a physical response to emotion. And I got up, And the only thing that came to mind, the only thing I could say, the house was empty. I said, not today. But I didn't say it in that macho end of a movie kind of not today. It was a beg, a plead, a cry. Please, not today. I said that over and over. I packed my wife's bag. I packed my bag. Packed my son's bag. Picked up my sister-in-law. We drove 2 hours to the hospital. We get there, my son's in pediatric ICU. And we enter a whole new world. This is the biggest crash I've ever been in. I hope no one experiences a crash like that. And our prescription was for 69 weeks, we were going to have chemo every Thursday. We were going to have 33 days of consecutive proton radiation in Jacksonville, Florida. We were going to have 10 days of radiation on his lungs. And our doctor says, we're taking our best guess. Sit with that. If you're a parent, you feel it already. Instantly, my son goes to work. He's not fazed in the slightest. My brain shifted. I got there, I saw him, they moved us out of ICU, my brain shifted. I was standing on the porch of my house with my dad. My dad is a wreck. He is a wreck. He doesn't know what to do. He's scared to death. I am too. But I got to lead this family. I got to lead this community. I got to survive. And I looked at my dad, both in tears. And I said, Dad, we're healing. We're not dying. Don't ever forget that. Every time you come to this house, we're healing. And he did. And that was the motto. It was a few days later, my son said, hug your people. Things started to show up. A few days later, we started to see progress. A few weeks later, we started to see progress. This was very much every single day for what ended up being 70 weeks plus. Every single day, it was survive. It was not build, it was not thrive, it was like do your best. It was survive. Sometimes survive was sit in a corner and cry. So that's an extreme case of survive, but it holds true. After the crash, there's a period of survive. Mine happened to be 70 weeks. I hope nobody in this room ever experiences that. But you might know someone who does, and I want to tell you how you show up. This is how you show up. You understand where they are. This picture was taken on June 3rd, 2022, this past summer in Zion National Park. That's me and my son. We're on our electric bikes. We had just ridden up to the Narrows in Zion. We'd done a little hike, dipped our feet in the river. 3 years earlier, we were in the hospital. Do you think that this was so sweet, this moment? We're cruising, Bax is here. That bike would do 25 miles an hour. We were doing 27 miles, weren't we, buddy? We wound it up to 27 miles an hour coming down the mountain. I would feel this little hand on my back telling me to slow down or go faster. The gratitude for that moment went back to that survive. Without 69, 70 weeks of survive, that moment isn't as beautiful. I was breathing it in. The smells, the touches, the sounds, the sensory. That's a core memory for me. That meant the world to me. Don't ask me how much I paid for that day because I don't remember. The answer was yes. I don't care how much that day cost. The answer is yes. So we have to look at these moments and say, am I really juicing this life for as much as it's given me? We heard some people have been in business a long time, right? That's awesome. Create the life around it. Really savor that business, savor that life, be grateful for it. Everybody take a breath. I want new perspective today because you are the leaders of this business. You are the leaders of this industry. In my opinion, there is no better company to be with when you talk about innovation and leadership and creating a life around real estate. Here's where we go wrong in part 3. This says build with parenthetical rebuild. A lot of times we get into rebuild mode and we build the same thing we just left and we wonder why things haven't gotten better. We do the same thing we did last time, and we went, I don't understand why that didn't work. Right? So this is not rebuild, this is build. And when you go through a crash and you go into survive mode and you realize what exactly I want out of life and business, build that. Build that. Because you get one chance. How many times do you hear people who are older than you? It doesn't matter how old you are, they're older than you, and they say, I wish I'd done this when I was X age. Right? I'm 48. We live in a camper. We've traveled around the country for the last 13 months. I can't tell you how many people that are in retirement that say, I wish I had done this when I was your age. It's really easy to coast when you think you're on the back nine of life. But if you pause and say, I've got a lot of time left, and we'll talk about that. But you've got to build what you want. If you're not building what you want, you're wasting your time. Your desires have to be important to you. You have to actually chase them. So let's talk about building. I want to go back to NC State. Who loves NC State? Are you an alumni? Okay, me too, Wake Forest. Awesome. We'll talk. All right. So I bet you guys love Ohio or something like that, don't you? Makes sense. Makes sense. So let's go back to NC State. I get back into NC State, and I'm not a good student. I'm getting by. I walked into the guidance office. I said, look, I got 2 years. I got to be out of here. They were like, you sound like a great candidate for the communications department. I said, I'll have that. So I get back in NC State, and I had a great time. I worked all the time. I studied, but there was one professor. And I want to tell this story. This is kind of how you and I, Jackie was coaching me at the time, and we went to a retreat, and they asked for anybody who wanted to speak to get up on stage. And I said, I think I'd like to do that. And Jackie pretty much kicked me in my butt up on there, on the little area. And we finished, and Jackie said, you've got to do that more. Right? And fast forward, and here we are. Right? So Jackie's been here since the beginning, and this is the story I told that day. So I met Dr. Ray Camp when I was at NC State my senior year. I don't know if anyone's been to college. My senior year consisted of communication ethics, scuba diving, piano, and fitness. Those are the 4 classes I had spring semester my senior year. It was really tough on me. I don't know how I made it. It was really hard. The studying was brutal, but I was in the best shape of my life. So there's that. But Dr. Camp taught communication ethics class. He said, and I was a marginal student, I was like, I need a C, like maybe. I might be able to squeak out of here with a D. I need a C. We had a paper. We were going to watch a movie and then write a paper on it, ethical dilemmas in communication style. And it counted for like 30 or 40%. Enough of our grade to where if I didn't do well on it, I was going to be in jeopardy. I was going to have to really phone in some favors. And so we all picked our movie, and I, of course, I procrastinate. And I wait till 2 days before the paper's due, and I go to Dr. Kim. I was like, I don't like my movie. That's the problem. I don't like my movie. I want to pick a new movie. And he was like, oh, boy. He said, Kevin, he reminded me how much of my grade this was going to be. I said, yeah. I said, but I got this movie. It's called Alive, and it's about a rugby team whose airplane crashes in the Andes Mountains, and they have to resort to cannibalism to survive, and they hike out of there. That's the movie I want to do. And he was like, are you sure? This paper's due in 2 days. And I said, and it's a communications ethics class, so he can't really be like, well, for you, I'll just extend the deadline. Can't really do that, right? So I said, yeah, I think I really want to do it. He said, well, Kevin, I believe in you. And if this is what you want, I'll let you switch your movies, but don't let me down. Whew. I felt it. I was like, oh boy, okay. Am I doing the right thing? So I go to Blockbuster. This is where, you had to go rent the movies back in the day. You guys remember that? Be Kind, Rewind, right? So I go to Blockbuster and I rent the movie, but I also rented a documentary about the movie. So I sat there for the next 2 days. I might have slept 3 or 4 hours the next 2 days. I watched the documentary over and over. I watched the movie over and over. I wrote a 36-page paper about the ethical dilemmas of this movie. And I remember it's 36 pages because I was like, I hope I'd never do that again. And I've never, outside of the books I've written, I've not written that much in my life, right? So I go to turn the paper in. I'm like, all right, this is it. Find out what I'm made of. Find out what this is. Well, it comes time to get the papers back toward the end of the semester. And Dr. Camp walks in, and it was a pretty casual, smaller class. And he says, I was really underwhelmed at the effort on these papers. I go, oh boy, here we go. All right, this is where I start to get up my wallet. And I'm like, I got $4.37 in my checking account. I can probably sell my car. Got to get out of here. And he said, but there were 2 papers that were really impressive. And you know where I'm going with this. And I'm like, it was her and him. Clearly. Teacher's pets, they do all the best work. Well, one of the papers was my paper. And I was like, I might have gotten a B. Woo! Might have gotten a B. So he hands the papers back, and I got an A+. And so I was going to graduate college, and that was great, and I did. But he said something else. He said, I took the liberty of submitting these 2 papers to the Southern States Communications Association event in San Antonio, Texas, next month. And I said, whatever, man. I got a diploma. I can go wherever I want, right? So it was about a week and a half, 2 weeks later, he calls me into his office. He actually had to call me on the phone and say, come into my office. There was no email or text or anything like that. So I go to his office. He said, Kevin, they'd like you to come to San Antonio. And they want you to read parts of your paper at the conference. I was like, what? The kid who failed out of college, never been called an academic in his life, and now he's going to a big fancy conference. I didn't have any money, so I got the only wrinkled suit I had out of the closet. I took out 2 credit cards. I bought a flight to San Antonio and got the cheapest hotel I could find that was close enough to walk to Margaritas. And I went to San Antonio. And beforehand, we had decided on the excerpts I was going to read. And so I get to San Antonio, and they put you in these little breakout rooms kind of thing, and they have you read your paper. And I'm like, I'm just going to read my paper, have my food, and fly back, and that'll be that. So I get in there in the room to read my paper, my wrinkly suit that, I don't know, I'm tall, and so when you're young, the shoulders kind of hang down halfway on your arms. It doesn't fit right. I'm uncomfortable. The tie is not quite, proper. And it's standing room only in the room. And I was like, wow, there must be somebody really important here. But it was standing room only. I was like, okay, whatever. So I read my paper. People clapped and acknowledged that I had the courage to do it. So we get to and so then I did the only thing that a college student would do. I went to the Riverwalk and had margaritas. I was like, I'm going there. I'm going to have some chips and margaritas. So I did that. The next morning at the awards breakfast, I went, and I didn't get too crazy. I wasn't that crazy at that time. But I went to the breakfast. I was like, I'm going to grab some breakfast, get on a plane, head on back. And I'm at the breakfast, still in that wrinkly suit, same one I had the day before, right? I'm sitting with a group of people at the table. Some of them are clearly from universities, and we're just chatting. And I had hair that looked similar to what I have now, oddly enough. And they started to announce the awards. And they were like, and for undergraduate paper of the year, the award goes to Kevin Hoover. And I was like, and one of the ladies at the table said, I'm sorry, isn't that you? And I was like, oh my gosh, I won the whole thing, right? So they gave me $100, so it wasn't like this big coveted prize. Right? They gave me a $100 check, but I was like, I've never been called smart in all my life. I've never been acknowledged for any of the work I've done. Dr. Camp said, I believe in you and don't let me down, and I gave it all I had. That was my potential. That was my potential. I had to rebuild myself. I had to rebuild the way I think. I had to build myself in a new direction. Now, here's the irony of the story. That moment reshaped how I thought about myself moving forward. Had nothing to do with the $100 I won, even though I was considered pretty rich on my haul when I got back. Had nothing to do with the $100 or the award or anything like that. Had everything to do with how I thought about myself. I had to rebuild that thought. I saw some people earlier say, I want to do 50 deals, I want to do 100 deals. Own whatever that is. I want people to say, I want to do 42. I'd like to do 31. I'd like to do 114. I want that specific goal, right? So we have to get really clear about this idea. Are we rebuilding something we've already had before, or are we building something new and something fresh and something that will serve us? So I washed dishes at a Japanese steakhouse during that time in my life. Fast forward 20 years, I'm running 6 restaurants, sushi restaurants in Manhattan for a $90 million company. It would be impressive if it was $90 billion. That would have been really good for me. But it was a $90 million company. So I went from dishwasher to director of operations in sushi because I had this newfound faith, this newfound confidence. I had great faith in my ability to learn. So that's why we have to be very discerning about the idea of building or rebuilding. Are you building something new, or are you rebuilding what already exists, what you already decided you don't like? Ask yourself that in the micro. It could be a podcast. It could be social media posts. It could be a business. It could be sales calls. Decide if you're rebuilding or you're building fresh. What do you think serves you best? All the innovation happens in the building, not the rebuilding. That's why it's called innovation. Right? Let's talk about legacy. Who wants to leave a strong legacy? I hope more people than this or we're in trouble. Come on, everybody, let me see your hand, please. Just humor me for a minute. I need some faith here. Yeah, I know everybody does, but what is legacy? What is it? Just throw out anybody ideas. What is legacy? Impacting others. Good. Footprint. Generation. Contribution. Excellent. Yeah, it's when we're gone, what's next? How do we leave things behind us? If you have kids, or you know people that have kids, they'll say, oh, I want my children to live a little better than I did. Or they'll say, oh, I really want the people around me to have a better time. I really want to empower people. We see that all the time. That's wonderful, right? Legacy is not necessarily, I think there's two definitions in the dictionary about it. One has to do with property and money. The property and money you leave for whoever's in your life at that time. The next has to do with the lessons, right? I don't want to leave my son a big check. I want to teach him how to make as much money as he wants. There's a difference. I don't want to leave my son enough money that he'll mess it up. I want to leave him with the knowledge that when he gets that amount of money, he knows exactly what to do with it. I want to leave my son with enough power that he goes, I can do whatever I want within reason, and I hope that it helps other people. I want to show people the way. The way is not easy. The people who are really changing this business are not going at it easy. They're not half-assing it. Sorry, Bax, I'll put money in the jar at home. So when we think about this idea of legacy, you have to be very clear. Like, what is it that I'm leaving behind? For my team, for my family, for my friends, for my community, for real estate, the industry. What am I leaving behind? Who knows what that is? Oh, everyone's aging themselves right now. Yeah. So I have common themes when I give talks, and it makes sense to bring it up. So I have studied Blockbuster and their demise quite a bit because they were, if you remember back in the day, they were a powerhouse. Recently I watched a documentary on it. It shed it a whole new light. If you would ask me, and I'll ask you, why did Blockbuster go out of business? Say it again. They didn't keep up with technology. Why else? Turned down opportunities. Why else? They didn't want to change. Why else? Shift? Couldn't shift. Right. All that's correct. All that's correct. I learned something that was on the minute end of that shed a whole new light on it. So at the highlight, Blockbuster had 9,000 stores nationwide. That's pretty good. Some people own 40, 50 stores. That's their legacy. This is what I'm leaving behind. It didn't work out that way. We know. Now I think there's one store in Oregon. And it's holding on, But here's the decision. So when Netflix came out, I was a member of Netflix early on, 2005, 2006. I lived in New York City. Netflix would send you 3 DVDs a month, and you keep them as long as you like for, like $3.99 a month or $4 a month, something like that. It was ridiculous. So that was Netflix model at the time. They weren't streaming or anything yet. They would send you 3 DVDs, which you had to go to the store and buy from Blockbuster. You keep it as long as you like. The faster you can send it back, the faster you get a new DVD, and you just keep going, right? So I was like, I'm watching tonight, all of them. Back they go, right? So then it was at that moment that Blockbuster said, no more late fees. To try to keep up. Do you remember that? There was a big protest, and the commercials were, no more late fees, right? The next year, that no late fee cost them $250 million in revenue. The very next year. So one decision that they thought, hey, we're going to keep up with these guys, these mail people, these Netflix people, whatever, right? And we're going to say, no late fees, you can keep our movies as long as you want to. They didn't consider that's removing $250 million from the revenue stream of the business. Fast forward to 2008, what happened? What position was Blockbuster in at that time? Blockbuster had the technology. They had the technology. Technology was not their problem. Funding was their problem. Netflix was leveraged, positioned, and ready. Blockbuster had cut $250 million out of the revenue stream, and they were dying. I was like, oh, decisions matter. There's a lot of speculation around that choice, too. There's a story that goes around that Netflix offered to buy Blockbuster, Blockbuster offered to buy Netflix, something like that. There was meetings, back in these closed rooms where the powerful people go, a bunch of cigar smoke, So there's a lot of speculation around that. But this one was the president of Blockbuster at the time, the CEO of Blockbuster at the time, decided no more late fees, cut $250 million out of their revenue. The next year he was replaced as CEO. And that decision was the difference in them being leveraged enough to possibly continue and being dead in the water. So we have to consider our decisions when it comes to our legacy. Who does it impact? On the daily. If I don't get this marketing right, who does it affect? We have to consider that when we talk about the legacy. Now, the technology changed, everything changed, but, and they, bless their heart, if you're Southern, you know what I mean. Or bless your heart, you know. Stephanie knows. They had everything there, they just weren't leveraged enough to keep up. So you've got to look at that in your business. What's coming down your road for your business, not real estate, your business, and are you leveraged? Are you making decisions today that will impact a year from now? It's not a doom and gloom. This is real business talk. This is how corporations work. This is how high-end business people operate. They don't say, well, I guess it's going to be okay. They say, all right, lay the toolkit out. What do we need? What are our possible decisions in this point? What are the possible benefits? What's the risk? Right? When we got in the camper, my job, one job. Never been RVing before in my life. I had one job. Anyone want to venture a guess what that job was? Say again? Well, that became a second job, yeah. So my job was keep my family safe. I had one job, keep my family safe. And that's why running out of gas was such a big deal to me, because I felt like I was not keeping my family safe. So we've got to look at these decisions. Now, guess what I do every time we travel? I'm looking at Google Maps, I'm looking at Google Earth, I'm like, where's that mountain? How high is that? Right? So we have to look at our legacy and really consider what we're doing on the daily. I took this picture in Monument Valley, Utah. It's nights like this where you really step back and you say, what's all this for? What am I really working towards? You know, a lot of people will say the money, and we all want money, right? Money should be part of your life. Who wants to help people? Right, you can't do that without money. You should make as much money as you can. I believe everyone in this room is a good person. I believe if I gave everyone $1 million in this room, and if I had it, I would, you would go do some amazing things with it. So we all need money. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about what are we going to do with that money? What legacy does that money create? Right? So I was sitting in Monument Valley, Utah. I had this flashback moment. I remember second grade, I had done a school project about the Navajo Nation. And I built my little hogan out of popsicle sticks, and you know, I think my dad probably glued it to the board and was mad that he had to do it. And then we sprinkled some dirt on it and on some Elmer's glue and took it in. I was like, here's my project. So that was my experience in learning about the Navajo Nation. And this particular time, I'm sitting in Navajo Nation with my wife and my son at a campfire with Navajo elders, listening to stories, seeing the dances, seeing the music, eating the food. And I'm like, this is a much better way to learn for me. So we have to consider, what are we doing with our money? What legacy does that leave? And it can be whatever you want. Here's what I will say about legacy. If you go small, it will be small. It's true, right? It's true, right? Because what do? We overestimate what we can do in 5 years. We underestimate what we can do in 1. I've driven 15,000 miles. I've been to 12 national parks in 28 states. And I never thought that wasn't even on the radar. And that's not bragging. I'm replacing my son's childhood. He spent 2 years in a hospital. So the purpose of the trip is not because we can. It's because we're going to figure out a way to make sure he has a childhood. That's the legacy, right? The most valuable thing you leave behind is time that you spend. You never want to be a bird on a wire hearing someone say, remember that time we weren't together? Remember that time we didn't do that thing? Remember the time I needed you and you weren't here? You never want that to be the case as part of your legacy. The time you spend is the most important thing you can leave behind. I need you to know you still have time. You still have time. I don't care where you are in business. I don't care where you are in life. I don't care where you are. You still have time. You have a ton of time. But you need to act like today's your day. You need to act like you're laying on my kitchen floor with me and I'm saying, not today. And you're going, damn right, not today. I got you. right? We still have time. One of my coaches told me this year, he said, here's what I want you to do, Kevin. I want you to do it. If you feel like recording this, pull your phone up, record this. I'll tell you what to do. I want you to do it as an exercise that will change the way you think. If you need to write it down, just write it down. Feel free to do whatever you have to do. For some of you, this is going to be a little difficult. For others, you're going to be like, I get it, and I want to do it. I encourage you to channel whatever voice that is and say, I'm going to try this and see if it changes the way I think. I want you to pick the age exactly that you'll die. The exact number, how old you will be when you take your last breath. Envision that age. And then I want you to go backwards from that age. Write that age at the top of the paper if you need to. Write the current age at the bottom of the paper. And I want you to go backwards by decade and list everything you want to do in those decades. Here's the caveat. It can't be about business. So if you go back, if you pick your age and you start going back by the decade, and you start writing the things that you really, really want to do, and it's not about business, and you look at that list and you go, wow, I've got time, but I got to get to it, because tomorrow's not guaranteed. And then I want you to look at that list and say, what can I do now? What needs to start happening now? Not what should I have started last week, or when I'm in my 30s, that would have been great. What can I start now? I've got 2 years left in my 40s. Do you know what my list looks like? It's big. It's a lot. You know what I'm going to do in my 70s? I'm going to surf in Costa Rica. Do not edit. If you think small, it will be small. If you coast because you're supposed to coast because you're retired, that's what you will do. So we have to think of legacy like this, but you have time. You do if you start today. How's that? Do I have more time? I can talk to you. Am I over?